Developer's notes. We are happy with Enhancement Shaman's gameplay going into Curse of Ulatek. This was in the class tuning from last week for 12.1, and I actually do kind of agree. I have been having fun with Enhance, I think it's an enjoyable spec, and many others share that sentiment. And I am happy that they are happy. But Enhancement Shaman has seen 0 design changes since the first week of Midnight Beta around 9 months ago, and I think there are some points of frustration with the gameplay that were never ironed out. So when I read the notes, I was a little bit confused to see only some numerical changes. In my eyes, the number one issue with Enhancement Shaman right now is how they have implemented the random procs of Doom wins. In Midnight, they changed the Ascendance talent to not only give you Ascendance itself, but also give you a chance to proc Doom wins at any time. And I do enjoy getting a Doom wins proc. It does make the gameplay varied. At any time, you can suddenly feel super strong and switch up your rotation for 10 seconds. The issue comes with the chasms in DPS you get when you don't proc for an extended period of time. Like here is a pull in my Sarah on the Hex Guardian, I am battling the tank, I didn't proc at all. Then we depleted, ran it back Resil key, and on the same pull I proc just once, I'm doing about 100k more DPS, I'm with the other DPS. But that's just RNG, it's the same for any RNG mechanic, right? The only way to fix that would be to remove it, right? Well, not exactly. There is actually already a system in place to combat bad RNG for Doomwinds procs, and the issue is that it is not implemented correctly. Doomwinds uses the deck of cards RNG system, where you are guaranteed a certain amount of procs in a certain amount of casts. No more, no less. The system is easy to explain. Imagine you have a standard deck of playing cards. You shuffle it, and then every time you spend Maelstrom, you draw a card. When you draw an ace, Doomwinds activates. Once you finish the deck, it gets shuffled again, and you start from the top. The system is actually very good when used correctly, and it has been utilized for many Shaman procs. Tempest is on a deck that works a similar way for both specs, as is the Crash Lightning proc from the Apex, and the deck system works very well for these procs. But with Doomwinds, the deck is too big. For every 600 Maelstrom you spend, you can get 3 procs of Doomwinds, which lines up with their given proc rate of 0.5% per Maelstrom. But because the deck is so big, you can go 500 Maelstrom without getting a proc, or you could get all 3 procs in your first 100 Maelstrom, and then go 500 Maelstrom without getting a proc after that. And it takes a long time to get through 600 Maelstrom. On Lura, I played Stormbringer Enhance. My first deck is cycled at 5 minutes 20 into the fight. So if I was unlucky and my procs were all at the bottom of the deck, I would get no procs for the first 5 minutes. This is a big problem because a lot of important phases on bosses and a lot of important pulls in dungeons can last 1 to 2 minutes. We are at the point of the season where we kill Chimeras in one phase, the fight lasts 2 minutes. I can only spend 240 Maelstrom in 2 minutes, which is only a third of the deck. On average, I'd get 1 proc in a pull, but the possible swing is absolutely massive. You could have all 3 procs at the top of the deck and get 3 procs in a pull, or you could have your procs at the bottom of the deck and get 0 procs. And this isn't just something exclusive to farm bosses. In the next tier, it seems the penultimate boss will have important burn phases lasting about 2 minutes. I think it is fine for there to be RNG in the spec, but the RNG should probably be for when you get the procs rather than if you're going to get the procs at all. I believe the deck of card system would work fine for Doomwinds if the deck was smaller. Now the second issue with Doomwinds is even more egregious and should be a very quick fix. Procking Doomwinds twice in a row does not extend the duration. Here is a clip where I proc a full 10-second Doomwinds, and the very next global procs another Doomwinds. Now logically, 2 procs of Doomwinds together would make a 20-second Doomwinds, but instead the duration goes up to 11 seconds, meaning I just lost 9 seconds of the second Doomwinds proc just because I got too lucky. Now, if Doomwinds wasn't on the deck system, this would be whatever. It would just mean that I got lucky at the wrong time. But because of the deck of card system, I am losing one of my very valuable 3 procs here. So I think it should probably extend to the full duration. And then a third issue with this system is that you are incentivized to not spend at the end of a pull in case you proc. Unlike the other issues, this is not so much an easy fix and probably requires a design change. So I think it is less egregious, lower priority, but it does feel quite bad to have your Doomwinds stick down while you are running between pulls. So right now, I would say that Doomwinds RNG has highs that feel really good and some lows that feel really, really frustrating. So I just hope that this proc system receives the small changes required to remove these points of frustration. The next concern I have is the loss of priority target damage when extra mobs become present. Enhancement Shaman has a few spells in the kit that get fully split, and a new tier set bonus that gets partially disabled in AoE. All logs you see in this section will be from standardized tests in the new dummy zone they added on PTR. Here is my single target breakdown as Stormbringer. Highlighted in red are 2 abilities that will drop down heavily upon adding a second target. The Crash Lightning splash damage is fully split, and the Fire Nova tier set only increases its damage if you have exactly one target. Here is my priority damage on 2 targets as Stormbringer. What this means is I had 2 dummies, but I'm only measuring the damage done to my main target. The rotation I used was the one that would provide maximum priority damage. So the 2 abilities highlighted in red are costing me 20k DPS between them, just because there is a second target near the boss. Now, I don't really understand why the tier set Fire Nova is only increased when fighting a single target and not just increased on the priority target that it comes from. But Stormbringer at least has things like Lightning Rod and also large benefits from Extra Maelstrom that make it come back a bit on 5 targets. You're still not really funneling or prioing on 5 targets, but you're not losing immense damage. Totemic, on the other hand, is even worse in this regard. This is my single target breakdown as Totemic, and this is my priority target damage on 5 targets. As you can see, the Surging Bolt ability is completely missing. The totem had a mind of its own and sent every single Surging Bolt into dummy number 4, which I never targeted. And then the abilities that I mentioned earlier lost me a lot of damage again. I did gain a bit from the Extra Maelstrom, giving me more hot hands uptime, but it was not enough to make up for what I lost, and I ended up doing 26k less DPS. And this becomes very apparent if you look at current season damage on the first boss of Algathar. From the rank 1 Totemic log, it is clear that Totemic loses a considerable amount of boss damage just because of how many adds there are on Overgrown Ancient. Now, I know Enhance has been a prio monster in the past, sometimes potentially doing too much prio damage, but I don't think I should be losing 20k single target DPS from the mere presence of a second enemy. Now, the third issue that I have is a more broad topic. It is a harder thing to fix, and I don't expect them to fix it for Season 2, but I would like, in the future, to see Enhancement Shaman have a more consistent damage profile. Their main goal for this patch was to reduce burst cooldown DPS for all classes, and Enhancement Shaman is one of the more bursty specs right now. Like many other classes, Enhancement Shaman got a sweep of changes targeting their burst, but they didn't actually do much. Here is the damage graph before and after the changes. And here are the graphs laid over each other. Not much different, right? The peaks are the same, the time outside of cooldowns is just ever so slightly stronger. But it is kinda hard for Blizzard to nerf cooldowns for Enhance because virtually every button is made stronger during them. Any Storm Strike buffs will buff Ascendance, as Storm Strike is cast every global in Ascendance. Any Lava Lash buffs will buff the Doom Winds window, as the Lava Lash is guaranteed every second global. Any Spender buffs will buff Ascendance or Doom Winds because of Thorims. Any Crash Lightning buff will also buff these cooldowns because you're spending more during them, thus getting more Apex procs. And practically the only thing left is to directly nerf aspects of the cooldowns themselves, but that will just make them feel weak. And I am actually kind of concerned right now about the Tempest nerf, because Tempest itself should feel strong, and I feel like they did hit it kind of hard. This does put into perspective why they chose Voltaic Blaze for the tier set though. But it is kind of fine for some specs to be bursty. Enhanced Burst is not overpowered. It definitely was weaker in Season 1 than Ellie's Burst, which kind of was overpowered, but I think the lack of any consistent option is a big departure from what Enhancement Shaman used to be. Now, all the way back in Shadowlands when I first picked up Shaman, the profile was very hot hands based without any real massive cooldowns. This continued into Dragonflight under the build coined the Elementalist build, which focused on Lava Lash and Frost Shock talents. The only real cooldown in this build was Primordial Wave, and you were basically able to deal damage all the time. Now, going into War Within, we saw the initial departure from this concept of consistent damage, with both Totemic and Stormbringer being extremely bursty and also a bit overpowered. But that didn't last very long, and in Season 2 of War Within, they reworked Totemic to be a consistent damage Lava Lash focused spec. This is what Totemic looked like on a single target boss back then. There are clearly some peaks where I had Primordial Wave, but over the whole pool I am pretty much doing consistent damage, and when I got a proc of Hot Hands outside of cooldowns, it actually meant something. Now compare this to a log from today. On Voracious, my damage profile in Totemic looks like this. I have a clearly defined burst every 1 minute, and my profile is very predictable. Even if I proc a Hot Hands outside of my totem, I won't do much damage with it, because I only do damage in my 1 minutes. And Stormbringer as well is a bursty spec. You do good damage in your Ascendance, you do good damage when you have Doom Winds procs. Maybe if you get a chain of multiple resets and Tempests in a row, you actually do some out of cooldown damage as Stormbringer, but it is not something that I would call consistent. Now, I don't have an issue with Enhance having bursty builds. I like having cooldowns sometimes. I think Ascendance is fun, but I would like to be able to spec into a consistent damage build every once in a while like I could in the past. It is currently impossible to spec into a no cooldown build for Enhanced, even if you just wanted to as a joke. The closest you could get without dropping capstones is something like this, which would pretty much be non-functional and do no damage. In Totemic, you are forced to play 1 minute totem, and essentially forced to take Thorims as a result. The new design for Hot Hands rewards spending inside the totem window too much for you to not take the whole Doomwinds package. And in Stormbringer, there is too much power behind the Ascendance node and its Doomwinds procs. Even if you wanted to just play a 1 minute Doomwinds build in Stormbringer, there is a talent in the hero tree that will just do nothing if you don't play Ascendance. Now, my opinion on the matter is that the hero talents should be utilized more to allow a consistent profile as an option. Totemic has 2 choice nodes that have been locked in for 4 seasons. I feel like there is design space there to allow an option for the totem window to provide less burst and potentially even bring back old concepts such as a previous iteration of Hot Hands. But this is all more a desire for the future. I think that Enhancement Shaman is fun right now and would be even better with a few small fixes to the other previously mentioned frustrations of the kit. By the way, I actually think that Enhanced seems numerically viable on the PTR right now. A lot of the raid fights are 2 target as well, so I could actually see this being an Enhanced tier. No guarantees though.